Hello, my name is Francis Bradley and I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Electricity Association. Thank you for joining us today to hear discussions from members of our Board of Directors and CEA's leadership team on the state of Canada's electricity industry in 2021. Back in February 2020, virtually nobody, with the exception of Bill Gates in his now famous March 2015 TED Talk, would have predicted the arrival of and resulting devastating global impact of COVID-19. Much has been written about the pandemic, how it laid bare the fragility of global supply chains. It demonstrated how unprepared society is for a sustained emergency, and that there are limits to the surge capacity in our healthcare system. The pandemic also showed the resilience of our critical infrastructure. La pandémie a fait couler beaucoup d'encre. Il a été question de la façon dont elle a exposé la fragilité des chaînes d'approvisionnement mondiales. On a expliqué que la pandémie montre à quel point la société est mal préparée pour faire face à une situation d'urgence de longue durée. On a aussi dit qu'elle met en évidence les limites de la capacité de notre système de santé à répondre à une demande de pointe. Mais la pandémie a aussi fait ressortir la résilience de nos infrastructures essentielles. The economic impact on businesses and individuals due to the economic downturn was also unprecedented. Shuttered businesses and rising unemployment impacted electricity customers' ability to meet their commitments. As the snow melted, overdue utility bills led to a rise in deferrals and past due customers. In some jurisdictions, programs were introduced to ease the pressure on customers, but in some cases, this simply transferred the cash flow pressure from the customer to the LDCs. While initially praised by commentators for its response to COVID-19, the federal government's signals about its priorities in the fall and winter became increasingly opaque, with suggestions that priority should be placed upon a green recovery, on fiscal prudence, or on preparing for subsequent waves of the pandemic. The good news about the rollout of vaccines, initially met with significant relief across the country, has since been tempered due to concerns about the availability of supply sufficiency and tempering vaccine skepticism in order to ensure eventual herd immunity. Our government was focused for much of 2020 on the pandemic, but moved at the end of the year on two pieces of legislation key to our sector: net zero GHG emissions by 2050 and implementing the recommendations of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so, like the government, our industry is looking forward. We're ready to renew, to return to work we were doing before the world stopped. We're ready to build back better. Today you'll hear reflections on 2020 and how this changed forever the way our businesses operate. Aujourd'hui, j'ai invité quelques membres de notre conseil d'administration à se joindre à moi pour réfléchir à la pandémie et aux leçons que nous en avons tirées et pour en discuter. Après cette discussion, nous nous pencherons sur les mesures prises par le gouvernement afin d'atteindre la carbone neutralité. Nous analyserons aussi le contexte réglementaire au début de 2021, l'effectif du secteur de l'électricité et l'évolution de la clientèle au Canada. Without further ado, please welcome the President and CEO of Manitoba Hydro, Grewal, the President and CEO of Hydro Ottawa, Bryce Conrad, the President and CEO of Altalink, Thon, the President and CEO of Evolugen, Josée Guibord, and the President and CEO of Nova Scotia Power, Gregg. In March of 2020, when Canada went into lockdown, what were some of the immediate steps that you took as an electricity company to balance your business objectives with employee safety? Jay, do you want to give us the Manitoba Hydro perspective?
Well, it's a good question. And, everybody on this call, we're all essential services. So it was critical that we continue to serve our customers. The biggest impact that it had was 2/3 of our 5,400 employees moved to a model of working remotely, and 1/3 are still active in the field and with the support services that they need. Critical was building in redundancy, and redundancy not only from the perspective of having access to materials and PPE, but redundancy in terms of if there was ever an outbreak in any particular area that was critical for the 1/3 that were still serving our customers on the front line, that we had redundancy built in so that we could shift work crews, whether it's in system operations, whether it's in the warehouses and the like. The one thing I think that's unique about Manitoba Hydro is we're in a major capital build, an $8.7 billion project in the north, a new generating station. And we had to bring in amazing, numerous levels of protocols to be able to ensure that we continued to advance this project, because every day we would lose on productivity would just increase the cost more. So a lot of work that was done on that side with public health to ensure we kept that project going forward. We kept our employees there safe. And just as importantly, we kept the communities in the north safe.
Peter, what's the view from Nova Scotia Power?
A very similar story to Jay's. I think we probably have similar stories to tell. So we focused, on office employees. How do we quickly get them home with connectivity to the office? And, that's not only laptops, iPads, but it's also VPN, secure VPN access. And then the protocols for, our transmission and distribution workers going down to, single occupant and vehicle, and making sure we could augment the fleet to get employees to work sites. And then, unique protocols for each of our generating stations, which has a different design. And so space was limited. So, putting up temporary barriers, making sure we had access to all the appropriate PPE. So we did all of that. And I think the other important piece too is that as we sent employees home, it's important that you connect with those employees on a regular basis. So frequent town halls, giving updates on how the business is doing. And, just having an opportunity for employees to check in too was really, really important. And the last thing I mentioned, with the increased connectivity with people distributed remotely, certain amount of work to make sure we had a secure network, secure system, because cybersecurity is always a bit of a threat to all of us in the utility business. So making sure we had a secure network for everybody to connect to.
Josée, qu'est-ce que vous avez vu de Evolugen?
Oui, effectivement, mais comme les autres, on est allé rapidement à la maison pour la majorité de nos employés, évidemment ceux au bureau. Connectivité très, très importante, mais aussi pour nos opérations, c'était de séparer notre système de contrôle, le centre de contrôle et de séparer davantage les individus pour qu'ils puissent opérer de façon sécuritaire. On a créé aussi un nouveau backup à un autre centre dans nos opérations en Ontario, nord d'Ontario, pour venir en aide si jamais il y avait eu une éclosion dans notre centre de contrôle. Aux opérations, on était quand même chanceux d'être capable d'aussi séparer les équipes et même mettre les équipes en stand-by à la maison durant certaines périodes de temps, donc dans des shifts. Donc, ce qui voulait dire qu'il y avait des employés à la maison qu'on n'utilisait pas, mais qu'on payait quand même, parce qu'on voulait juste minimiser le risque autant que possible. On a fait la même chose du côté trading. Évidemment, on a une entité globale, donc la coopération et les appels pour les groupes et essayer d'apprendre d'un et l'autre autant que possible, des appels fréquents pour essayer de gérer tout ça ensemble et en collaboration. C'était très important également.
Bryce, what about the story from Hydro Ottawa?
Yeah, I mean, not to repeat the same thing that everyone else has already said, but we did a lot of the same things. The one thing I'd point out, and I'm sure my colleagues are the same way, is this didn't just happen to us on March 15th. In the case of Hydro Ottawa, we were tracking this. We initiated our business continuity plan. I think the second week of January, we started tracking this coming across and started to sort of put in place protective measures, et cetera, et cetera. So, when it finally came down to the point where we needed to shut down and send people home, we'd had plenty of time to get ready. So my guys weren't out at Best Buy picking up laptops. We had everything we needed to go home. So much like the rest of the folks on the call, we sent our employees home. We made the decision one day, sent them home. Effectively, they're all working remotely the next day with no issues. Our operations crews were reprofiled so that we, as Josée said, we're literally protecting, when they were home and not working, we were still making sure that they were protected and safe. Our control center, obviously, kind of the mothership, concentric circles of defense, whereas people used to be able to wander up into the control center, you had to get through some pretty tight security to get there. I think there's myself and 3 other people that could get into that room when we locked it down. So, and that's still in effect today. And the other point I'd make is, with everybody working from home, the everyday average outage became that much more of a problem, right? So you stopped doing, effectively planned work. We started doing just emergency response because, a 3-hour outage when you're in the middle of the day at work is no problem, but a 3-hour outage when you're working from home and your kids are, scrambling for Wi-Fi is a real problem. So, but it's worked well for us.
We have permanently shifted how our organizations operate. What is the one story you will tell 20 years from now about a pivotal change made during 2020 that is still relevant? Scott, what's the AltaLink view?
That people won't know how to get off mute on a Zoom call, I think will be the number one thing that we'll all remember.
That's right.
But you know what? I think it's amazing. You've got leadership across a lot of companies, not just in the electricity sector, but let's just say is generally older than 40 years. And if you would have told us that we could do what we can do remotely, many of us would have, but we've been on a spectrum, but we wouldn't have believed it. And I think it's forever will change how we run our businesses, the fact and how we work together as teams. Now, that said, I think it will end up becoming some kind of a hybrid because there's nothing that replaces face-to-face for a whole bunch of things that are much more effective. So I think that's the one thing that I would take away is that I think it'll forever change how we work together. And it's not going to be just, all work from home and all work in the office, that we'll end up with some kind of a blend here at the end of the day. And I know you only asked for one, but I think the second one is the one that Peter talked about. Whether they like it or not, my field employees, I can have a video chat with them in a substation shack now. And it's great to be connected, to hear directly from them about what's going on, what's in their way, and how we can help them do their jobs better. And then hopefully I can provide them some context as well. But that interconnectedness with the front line is going to forever change, I think, how we operate.
Josée, qu'est-ce que vous avez vu de Evolugen?
Ben, je pense pour moi, c'est un peu que c'était la communication et la collaboration, comment important que c'est. Puis que c'est pas nécessairement si facile, puis que la connectivité est tant bien importante. D'arracher le pansement, c'est facile, mais de s'assurer qu'après qu'on fonctionne bien, puis que la blessure est guérie, puis qu'on repart. Je pense que c'est là qu'on va se rappeler de OK, on est tous partis à la maison. Rapidement, we all went home. Rapidement, ça a très bien été, mais le retour, puis le retour de façon sécuritaire, puis la communication avec nos employés, d'assurer qu'on communique avec eux et qu'on regagne, je pense qu'il y en a d'autres qui l'ont mentionné un peu, qu'on regagne les conversations au water cooler, l'innovation, les conversations, que ce soit de réfléchir à des différentes façons de communiquer avec nos opérations. On a des lunettes maintenant avec des vidéos dedans, ou même s'assurer que le flot d'idées continue à avancer. Puis ça, c'est quelque chose que on est encore en train de déterminer. Puis il ne faut pas l'oublier de cette progression-là. Elle va prendre un certain temps, mais que la communication est importante et qu'on va se rappeler de comment on est venu à bout de repartir, que ce soit les projets qui appuient aussi dans nos opérations. On a arrêté, on les a repris en Q3. On a essayé de protéger les communautés. Encore, c'est quelque chose qu'on va se rappeler de la communication est importante, la collaboration est importante, puis comment repartir.
Bryce, what about the story from Hydro Ottawa?
Yeah, well, like Scott, I'm gonna pick two. So the good and the bad. The bad is we just built a brand new state-of-the-art facility that is entirely oriented towards collaboration spaces, open areas, and kitchenettes and modules and pods and all that crap that Google likes and wants. And of course, it's exactly what you don't want in the event of a pandemic. So hopefully we get back to some sense of normal and we stop using Zoom, and I can actually get back to using those sorts of things. But in all honesty, much like Scott said, I think it's about we've changed the way we work, and I think that's going to be a permanent structure. Whether we're working remotely or we're working in a hybrid fashion, the idea that your employees are able to work anywhere, anytime using these devices. The nature of work has changed, so I think that's something that will be a permanent.
As we work to build back better, what is one thing that the pandemic will change for the electricity sector? Peter, what's the view from Nova Scotia Power?
It's going to accelerate a change that's already been in action, I think, and it's really towards the decarbonization goal. Certainly in Atlantic Canada, that's a huge focus for us. We still burn coal, and we want to get off that. There's an opportunity, I think, with some government funding to assist to accelerate that transition to cleaner sources. So I think that's definitely a focus for us, and I think for all utilities. As you see that decarbonization hit different sectors too, it's going to hit the transportation sector and accelerate. It's going to hit the building sector with a higher price on carbon. It's going to have that effect across the gamut. And so I think that's an opportunity for companies like ours as we see load growth, we see different ways of serving our customers. So I think just to sum it up, it's really an acceleration of forces that were already in play.
Jay, do you want to give us the Manitoba Hydro perspective?
I would agree with Peter that the economic stimulus attached to policy that we see the feds now moving forward with, and the billions of dollars behind it, is only going to accelerate the pace of change. What I do think is different, though, is what we've all learned as we've worked through the pandemic, which has been almost a year now, is how agile we can be and how quickly we can respond to external factors that impact our business. So I think the positive out of this is that we've learned how agile we can be. And for us, we learned that it's not something you structure big and then wait and build it all out and then you go execute. You engage your employees in it, you give the parameters, they know how to go get it done. And it was our employees that got us to a place where we ensured reliability and safety for our public and our employees, because they went and figured it out. It wasn't a top down, and it was and that is going to be critical in an environment where we need to be agile. So we're learning to actually empower and trust our employees more, which I believe is going to be even more important in the evolving energy landscape that we're all going to be facing.
Scott, what's the AltaLink view?
Well, you know what, I might pick up on both Peter and Jay a little bit, and just say that I think that the Build Back Better is going to be around our cybersecurity piece. We are going to be much more. We know that we can work much more remotely, and we're going to want to continue to do that. And we'll get this. We need to build out that infrastructure so that we can work that way quite safely, because we're going to really want to do it. And to Jay's point, we've learned that we can be very agile in that. And that's going to be absolutely required as we move forward, whether it's changes in carbon policy or whatever's ahead of us. We know we can do it, but our big Achilles heel of working in this way is going to be cybersecurity. So I think we're going to, when we're talking about building back better, we're going to have a lot more attention on that than we might have in the past, as we try to really make sure that is robust and can do all the things that we know it can do.
Josée, what are perspectives from Evolugen?
On the agility side, I think also some of the benefit that we have in being able to invest in multiple products is the agility. that we'll have to be able to invest in things that will stimulate also that electricity sector. And with the decarbonization that others have highlighted, the flexibility of being able to invest in green hydrogen and the electrolyzers that will produce that, or other biofuels or other products that will need the green electricity that we're producing. It's that widening of the scope of what we can invest in and how we can continue to stimulate the electricity needs of the electricity sector.
Thank you to our CEOs for taking the time to reflect on 2020. Your insight is always valued. And now, I want to turn things over to two members of CEA's leadership team, Michael Powell, Vice President of Government Relations, and Julia Muggeridge, Vice President of Marketing and Communications, to discuss the government's movement towards Net Zero 2050. And thank you to Oracle Utilities for sponsoring this discussion.
Thank you to our sponsor, Oracle Utilities. Oracle helps utilities worldwide prepare for a sustainable, affordable energy and water future. Their mission-critical solutions help improve customer service, network operations, asset management, field services, and energy efficiency so that you can deliver the essential services you provide to your communities every day.
Hi, Julia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
We're in the same place.
It's so weird, but we're at least 6 feet apart.
We are.
84 inches, in fact.
It's nice that none of this conversation is happening through Microsoft Teams.
Indeed. I think today we're going to be talking about net zero by 2050, but before we do that, I think we should acknowledge these awesome new mugs that we have. It is our 130th anniversary this year. We thought it would be neat to announce it during this video.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We must be just about the oldest trade association in Canada at that point. 1891. There wasn't even a railway back then, I don't think.
As far as we can tell, we may be the oldest association in Canada, but these things aren't documented.
Mm-hmm. But mugs are. So net zero. What do you want to know?
I think what we should do is talk about what net zero by 2050 means.
Yeah, it's funny because it's all the buzz, but no one ever stops to talk about what it actually means. So it's pretty straightforward. The idea is that by 2050, the year, that Canada or whoever would not put any more carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than they're taking away. So, not quite the same as not emitting anything, but acknowledging that, we'll have to burn fossil fuels here and there, but we're absorbing the equivalent of that CO2 or whatever elsewhere.
So net zero by 2050 is one of our solutions on with the problem of climate change.
Yeah, so if the problem of climate change is all the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere, the first step is really stop putting any more in. And so that is the goal. And then eventually, depending on where you look, part of that would probably mean, even in reducing where that is. Right now, Canada emits, a little more than 700 megatons of carbon dioxide each year. Getting down to zero from there, even as the population grows and the economy grows, is going to be a challenge. For us and our sector, what that means is how can we use electricity to address some of these challenges? In Canada, 82% of the electricity we have is already generated by non-emitting sources, mostly hydro, but also nuclear and wind and solar. We have reduced our emissions by more than 40% since 2005. That's a good start. But the government has figured that in their climate plan that they announced in December of last year, that to get to net zero, we're going to need 2 to 3 times the amount of electricity that we have today.
So it sounds like we need to start talking about electrification.
That is what it is. And so I guess it's a chicken and egg problem. How do you make all this electricity and where is it going to go? Some of the stuff with electrification is going to really rely on things that we've already would recognize in our daily lives. So more EVs, shifting from different kinds of heating to electric heat, whether it be air source heat pumps or whatever. Buses, transit, you name it. Other stuff we'll have to figure out as we move forward. The really interesting thing, though, will be the kinds of technologies that are just emerging so that we're able to create energy in different ways. Hydrogen is a good example of that. I think as we move towards 2050, we'll see more things powered by hydrogen that is made with non-emitting sources, including electricity.
It's great to see that the government also introduced a hydrogen strategy back in December of 2020.
Yeah, they had a real flurry of announcements at the end of the year. It's almost like something else was going on through the rest of the year. But I think the big thing with a lot of these announcements is that they're the first step down a longer path. Things like hydrogen, we could talk about small modular reactors, so smaller nuclear reactors. We could talk about carbon capture and utilization. All of these are new technologies. And for us to hit these farther out goals, we're going to need to make sure that they develop into a way that is commercially viable and sustainable and economical. And announcements for strategies and plans are good, but it's how do we take them from where they are now and seize the opportunity and turn them into something that people can actually use.
We have 40 members from coast to coast to coast that represent the entire value chain of electricity, as you know, from generation all the way to the customer. What is the one thing we should really be advocating for right now from the government?
Well, we talked about some, future opportunities. I think one of the things that we really need to focus on now is how we can best use the technology that's already here. How do we take advantage of the electricity we already produce and the opportunities to move things forward? And I think what we really need to start with that is a national electrification plan. In 2018, the federal government and the provinces committed to a framework for a clean electric future. And unfortunately, that ideal went mostly the way that most federal provincial things go. I think, and we've seen bits of it evolve since then. So we've heard talk of the Atlantic Loop, which would connect clean power within the Maritime and Atlantic provinces, some connections between the Prairie provinces and so on. But how do we fit all these pieces together so that we know where we're supposed to go, where the needs are, and how we can get there in a way that is most efficient, both in terms of reliability, so we know the power is always there when you need it, but also in a way that reflects best value for the customer. Because at the end of the day, someone has to pay a bill.
All right, so it sounds like our first step is the development of an electrification strategy as we move towards net zero by 2050. What are the hazards or risks that we need to be paying attention to as we move in this direction?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really have to focus on is getting stuff built. And it's hard to build things in Canada. It's hard to build things anywhere. But if we're going to double or triple the amount of electricity that's produced, whether it's with new generation or transmission or figuring out how we're able to make investments in the local distribution system, those are all things that are hard problems that we need to address and really stay laser focused on advancing these things. I think the second thing is, and it's a weird risk to say, but there's an opportunity in all of this. The opportunity is that it's easy to think of this transition as a hardship, but I think it's the better way of thinking about the energy transition is an opportunity. That the way all of us live our lives and the way our economy is structured is going to shift over the course of the next 30 years. If you think back to 1990 versus today, the way we use technology and the kind of things we did are dramatically different. That's the same sort of thing that we're looking forward 30 years for. And so how can we make sure that as we build out a system that is clean and affordable and reliable, that we're doing so in a way that makes sure that we're building the kind of jobs that will make the system work now and into the future, and making sure that we remain the sort of prosperous country that we want to be.
And of course, we can't forget about the Canadian customer.
We can't. That's the first thing that comes from it all. In our sector, we have what, 80,000 jobs or 88,000 jobs, but the multiplier on those jobs is literally everyone else in the economy. And you can't do much in this country without electricity. And so making sure that we provide a commodity that is there and affordable will mean that Canadians are safe and secure into the future.
And I think that sets us up really nicely for our next discussion on the customer, which we're going to hear about shortly.
Awesome.
And so, Mike, happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Good to see you in person.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you, Michael and Julia. 2021 will certainly be an important year as we continue to carve out electricity's role in a net zero future.
Electricity is transforming every aspect of Canadians' lives. CEA members are Canada's largest electricity providers. The CEA Corporate Partner Program is your opportunity to connect to our members through in-person and virtual events in our many marketing channels. You'll gain access to decision makers across the entire electricity value chain, from generation through to the end customer. Contact us about becoming a CEA corporate partner. Together, our future is very bright.
Canada is moving to decarbonize the economy, and energy companies need to respond. We need to ensure our companies exist in an environment where they're able to build and meet the increased load caused by electrification. As well, the Canadian customer is changing and expects more choice and flexibility beyond the meter. So I'm very pleased to introduce Keith Cronkhite, the President and CEO of New Brunswick Power, who will be interviewed by Channa Perera, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs here at CEA, to discuss the Canadian regulatory landscape in 2021.
Joining me to talk about the state of the electricity industry and how it is regulated is Keith Cronkhite, President and CEO of NB Power. Thanks for joining, Keith.
Morning, Channa. Pleased to be here with you today.
Great. Let's start with the state of the industry. We have seen unprecedented transformation of the electricity industry over the last decade, from growing in renewables to advancements in communication technologies. Change has been relentless. Keith, can you provide a sense of what are the game changes we can anticipate in the decade ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Channa. I agree. I believe the industry has seen, the amount of change in the last 10 years. We haven't seen that degree of change probably in the previous 30 or 40 years, quite frankly. So it is significant. When we think about renewable energy and the surge we've seen in the uptake of that over the last number of years, I think over the next coming years, it'll be important that we figure out a way that we can integrate those renewables more seamlessly into the grid. The intermittency that occurs with wind and solar today is becoming more and more significant, and our ability to ensure that we do that seamlessly is going to be key to being able to integrate more renewables going forward. So there's no question that is going to be an absolute requirement. When we think about conservation and clean electricity, and how do we partner with our customers moving forward in distributed generation is going to be another key game changer, I would say, in that the customer normally in the past has been a recipient of electricity and they use it as they see fit. We're now seeing that changing in that customers will become more center in the conversation, whether it's through conservation methods that they may adopt, but equally as important as a distributed generator with solar panels or wind turbines within their local area. They are going to be a key part of that conversation moving forward. And behind the meter, the Internet of Things that is going on that will enable them to make choices about how they use electricity and who they partner with will be absolutely key. So, customers certainly are are wanting to be part of that dialogue and are going to be centric to the conversation moving forward. Absolutely. And we welcome that.
Now, certainly a lot of changes in the air, Keith. So the industry continues to be regulated by provincial energy boards. Do you think the current economic regulatory frameworks are structured in a way that to support this long-term transformation? And in your perspective, what are some of the regulatory pain points?
I think the short answer is no. And I think our experience through CanPut and dialogue with regulators right across the country is that, you know, they would openly admit, I think they're struggling with how do we transform or how do we oversee the transformation that's going on in the industry that allows utilities and instills confidence in the regulatory process or review and the decision making for customers that they are the right decisions. And I think they struggle with that. And I think for us, it's not about building a simple transmission line. While building a transmission line isn't always simple, or a generating plant, those have been the decisions of the past that the regulatory process has, for the most part, overseen. The transformation that's going on, the digital transformation that's going on is very difficult to say why. Why do you decide now that you need to make that change and that significant investment in order to prepare yourself for something that's coming 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road? And I think, you know, regulators struggle with that. I would say that the common denominator today is a conversation around how does it impact reliability or improve reliability? What is the business case or the business driver for some of those investments? And it's really, you know, breaking down that delivery chain within the utility system to say, this is the right investment for today and this is why. And in some cases, it won't revert back to a business case at the end of the day. It'll be around reliability, or it'll be around an enabler for something else to occur that involves the customer that we talked about earlier. So I think that is a struggle for the regulatory conversation today. And I think the other part is, you know, should the utility make those investments or should the private sector make some of those investments? Which is, again, another area that in conversations with regulators today, they struggle with. And so I think creating a dialogue and exploring these things, I'll say more deliberately moving forward, is going to be key to solving how we move forward in that regulatory landscape.
Mm-hmm. Now, Keith, what changes do you think then must be introduced to ensure the regulatory systems respond to the changing needs of the industry?
I would say that a common denominator is that we need to modernize the regulatory system. And that's not only in our jurisdictions, that's really right across the country. Regulatory systems tend to be driven by legislation. Legislation tends to be prescriptive. And as we move into this environment, when there's less certainty or less known about what our future holds, a prescriptive legislation typically will not work. So trying to future-proof some of that legislation that regulators rely on and creating a bit more flexibility in that will be important. I also think that, you know, from local government's perspective or provincial government's perspective, policy direction that provides utilities room to maneuver is going to be important. That is coupled with that. So not getting overly prescriptive in the legislation framework, I think, is a start, and providing I'll say a throttling, if you will, or tweaking from time to time through policy direction that is coupled with that, I think we'll get a better solution at the end of the day. I find today we're quite rigid in our process, and as a result of that, the ability to make change is hindered. The time it takes to make change is impacted. And as a result, we're not meeting the needs of customers, and they'll go about and make their own decisions outside of that framework that has an impact on the overall system and then has an impact on the utilities today. So going back again to that conversation with the customer is going to be key.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. That's all the time we have.
Thank you, Channa. Appreciate the opportunity. Have a safe day.
Thank you.
2020 was a year of social upheaval. Many Canadians shifted to a working from home environment, millions while balancing difficult family responsibilities. Others, our essential workers, continued to go into work every day and faced an onslaught of new health and safety precautions and concerns. A year in, and we're only beginning to understand the long-lasting impact this pandemic will have on our healthcare system and on all Canadians. Our final discussion of the day will be between our Director of Government Affairs, Leah Michalopulos, Director of Customer Counsel, Dominique, and the President and CEO of Electricity HR Canada, Branigan. Together, they will evaluate the impact of 2020 on our electricity customer and on our workforce.
Hi, Diana. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you, Leah.
So, Diana, as we know, there's two types of customers. We have our residential customers and we have sort of our big businesses. So, specifically, when we look back at 2020 and the pandemic, how have electricity companies responded to residential customers in 2020, making them feel like sure that they won't lose out on power? And beyond that, how have they responded more to our commercial customers in 2020 as well?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. So members were really quick to respond to COVID-19 and both residential and commercial customers by doing immediate actions like halting disconnects and collections activities and offering flexible payment options and payment deferrals, and also halting planned work outages as well, and any maintenance. That was all stopped, but also setting up funds that are specifically targeted to residential customers. So one member set up a COVID-19 relief fund that targeted those customers who had lost a job because of COVID-19, and eligible customers were able to get 3 months, up to 3 months of credit on their hydro bill. And what I've seen across the country as well is members really provided assistance through community organizations like the United Way, and also through food banks as well. Yeah, so they were really quick to pivot. And then for the commercial and industrial customers, our members have really a personal relationship with those customers, so they were able to reach out to them directly and provide more tailored assistance and see what their specific needs were. But similar to the residential customers, they did things like halt disconnects and connections and all planned work, and also set up things like provide the security deposits back to small businesses who had cash flow issues. And also one member utility had also a special relief fund where they can get up to 3 months of charges on their utility bill.
Wow. So I think the pandemic has shown just how important reliable electricity is. So how do you think the pandemic might have shifted the way Canadians look at their local electrical utility?
Yeah, so what we've seen in our 2020 National Customer Survey results is that these direct actions that I just mentioned really impacted customer satisfaction across the country. So things like we've seen a real gain in areas like brand trust, for instance, and caring for the customer, transparency. Another thing would be being a good corporate citizen, and also in consulting the customer before making any decisions. So members, I think, because they have been so proactive, those actions were really seen in results from 2020, and that people have a positive perception of their local utility.
So Diana, customers have experienced a difficult year in 2020, and I think our members have responded accordingly. But with 2020 now behind us, we need to start thinking about the future challenges that customers might face. So what are some of those challenges, in your opinion, and how should utilities respond?
Yeah, I think Well, the pandemic isn't behind us, so it's very much a challenge for everybody, including customers and our member utilities. For example, in the commercial and industrial survey, we saw that 81% of CNI customers feel confident that they can make it through the second wave of the pandemic, but 16% said that they do not. So this represents a huge challenge not only for our sector, but also for the economy at large. And against that backdrop, we have the carbon tax, we have net zero by 2050 that's being legislated by the government. So electrification is going to be a big piece of that. We have to understand what those implications are, so electrification on the grid, innovation, expanding the grid, and making sure that while we're doing all of this, that rates are affordable for the customer. So a number of challenges for our member utilities, but also a number of opportunities as well.
So Diana, I'm glad you brought up the federal government because as the Canadian government starts to think about achieving net zero by 2050 and the decarbonization of the economy, what can we do to prepare Canadians for the possibility of changing prices?
So I believe education is the key. Canadians generally don't understand the electricity system. They don't understand, I believe, how it's operated, how it's regulated. Canada has one of the cleanest electricity systems with over 80% GHG-free emissions, and I don't believe that's widely known by the Canadian public. Additionally, we have some of the lowest electricity rates among the OECD countries, according to IEA stats, and I don't think people know that either. So I think as a sector, we need to have a very strategic and concerted effort to educate customers, to educate the government, to educate stakeholders on all of the innovative things we're doing as an industry, and in terms of being net zero ready. And in fact, in our survey, 2020 survey, 3 out of 5 Canadians supported a shift to a greener economy, and a majority of those people were familiar with the electricity system. So what that tells me really is that education is the key.
Great. Thanks, Diana. I think keeping customers top of mind is going to continue to be a priority for all electricity companies.
Definitely.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Leah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So this has been a turbulent year for every workplace, and I think our employees have had 2 main types of challenges. I think first, we've had the group of employees who have shifted, well, quite suddenly and for long term from working from home. And second, we've had the large portion of our workforce that has had to continue to go into work to ensure reliable power for Canadians. So how did electricity companies ensure the safety of both these types of workers during COVID-19?
Well, I think our industry has been terribly resilient, and I think part and parcel of that is the culture, of course, because safety has always been such a tremendous focus for every employee working at whatever location, whether it's generation, distribution, transmission, whatever it may be. And so we've always had that storm mentality to a certain extent. So a lot of our utilities and our employers really were prepared to a certain extent for what happened. And a lot of organizations had good business continuity plans in place, and some companies, of course, were prepared as they had seen SARS a number of years ago. And some organizations actually had pandemic preparedness plans, but I don't think that anybody foresaw the challenges that we see. We're here today, we're almost 11 months past the beginning of the pandemic, as it were, and so we still have many people working from home and all of the things that go with that. So we've been well prepared, but yes, lots of challenges. So when you think about those 2 cohorts that you mentioned, thousands of workers working from home pretty much overnight. There's 2 different things there. Less of a concern from a physicality perspective, more concerns about mental health, for example, right? So because people are having to work with, challenges, working with children at the table, or worried about parents and worried about staying safe themselves. So we've seen a lot of effort and a lot of work done by employers to support employees in that area. And then for our essential critical workers, those who are still in the field, in the control room, day in, day out, power is 365, 24/7, so we need to make sure that we have the folks there. They have been, unsung heroes, and we've seen our employers do a lot of great things, whether it was plexiglass in the middle of the car to make sure that they're getting to the work site safely, even to renting RVs and hotel rooms for employees who had to go in to make sure that they were safe, and putting people into cohorts or bubbles that worked in teams. There were so many different things that we saw companies do to make sure that people were safe at every different stage of their workday.
That's great. I think the word resilient was so key during this whole pandemic. That's great. So just as a follow-up for this question, so you kind of noted that we could have never really seen the big challenges of COVID coming. So how do organizations prepare for challenges like COVID? And how does being flexible in the workplace sort of help solve these challenges that might come?
I think it's all about being deliberate, being flexible. I actually think we're living in a major experiment right now, and it's going to be really interesting to see how these things roll over the next year. We're almost 1 year in. So what did that, working remotely, people working from home, what did that look like? Did people like it? Did people hate it? There's pros and cons to both, and I've heard employees and leaders talk about this. For many people, they loved not having to commute. They loved not having to travel every day, whether it was 1 hour or 2 hours to get to work. For many, they missed the camaraderie, the communications, the opportunity to have those sort of sharing of knowledge moments, even the whiteboarding on a day-to-day basis. So I think leaders will really need to look at what has happened over this last 11 months, how have their organizations functioned, and what is the future of work going to look like going forward. I have to say, I do believe that the death of the office, I think that has been a little bit exaggerated. I do think we will get back to some semblance of normality. I think everything has gone electronic. Digitalization of policies and processes have been underway at all our employers. Some of those things will stay, they will remain, but I think many others are going to change the way that we work going forward. It's going to be a fascinating time. I think it really has accelerated that whole debate about the future of work by at least a decade. That is going to make a difference for employers who are looking to attract talent and who perhaps don't want to consider a hybrid working model. As an example, they want everybody back in the office. Well, some people may decide that that's not for them, and so they may not decide to continue working within that type of environment. So these are the types of things that employers are going to need to look at as they look at that workforce and what that workplace looks like going forward.
So I'm glad you brought up attracting top talent because I know that the electricity sector, going forward, you want the best talent, right? So how do you think tying things like ED&I and gender diversity help with getting the best people into our sector?
Well, I think at this stage we all know the business case for why we should be undertaking DEI initiatives and looking to ensure that we have the best people working in our workplaces. It has to be a very conscious decision by leaders to ensure that they are actually making time for this type of work, because until there's a sense of urgency and prioritization around the need to put in place DEI initiatives and practices that will really ensure that you have an inclusive workforce, we're not going to see change happen. You know, there's been lots of talk about this for decade after decade after decade, and we know that our Canadian electricity industry does not represent the Canadian population in the way that we would like it to. We have a lot of work and a lot of catching up to do, but it is absolutely doable. And if you think about wanting to be an employer of choice, and of course, you know, everyone wants to be an employer of choice, we need to look at attracting the best talent. We are going to have to compete with every other industry in Canada. We know the demographics. We know that there's not enough people coming through. We know that we're going to be competing for talent. So we need to do a better story. Employers need to tell a better story of what it is that they value within their organization and in their business. So they need to be very cognizant of looking at their board, looking at their annual report. Does that reflect? Do you have women? Do you have Indigenous people? Do you have people of color represented in your industry? If you don't, why would you expect that a young person is going to actually want to work for you? And young people are paying attention to these types of things right now. People want to work where they feel like they can make a difference, and they want to work in an organization that they respect and that they feel is also making a difference and living their values as well. So it's really important, and it's not rocket science. It's not a difficult thing to do, but again, it needs to be a conscious decision. And I think we need to put in place, there needs to be accountability for making that happen.
Well, it sounds like there are some challenges ahead, but it sounds like the sector is well suited to take those on, especially as we showed how we could take on COVID-19. So that's great.
Yes, it's a great industry to work in. We have challenges. We have work to do, but I think there's a real momentum there. You know, you mentioned from a societal perspective, Black Lives Matters. All of these things that are happening. I think they're an inflection point almost for us as a society, and so we really need to take advantage of what's going on to really make that change happen. It's not good enough to pay lip service to it and then start sliding backwards, but there are great things being underway right now by our employers. We see this every day. Great examples of things being done, great allies, great champions, people supporting each other. And that's what's always fun about working in this sector, is that people are really passionate about it. I've never seen an industry, I haven't worked in an industry where I've seen such passion for what people do. They're very proud of what they do. And sharing ideas, sharing best practices, I think that is what's going to propel us forward, so that over time, we're not even having to have a conversation about DEI and the need to ensure that we have, you know, all underrepresented groups with a seat at the table.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Michelle.
You're very welcome, Leah.
As you can appreciate from today's conversations, 2020 will forever be an important part of our history. We need to take these lessons as a sector, realize our vulnerabilities, and ensure our preparedness. We will build back better. This sector will continue to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electricity to Canadians, and will be essential to Canada's movement towards a low-carbon economy. Thank you to our sponsors, Electricity HR Canada and Oracle Utilities, and thank you for tuning in to the 2021 State of the Canadian Electricity Industry.